Hello, everyone. I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, for the next month, Louisiana's contested U.S. Senate seat will be getting lots of attention as the outcome could affect state and local politics. A vote coming before the City Council soon will surely affect zoning matters. And there is yet another try for a new plan for the World Trade Center. We'll look at these stories tonight, as well as how the state responds to wrongful imprisonment, plus some key local elections. And we'll look at some little-known qualities of the St. Charles Streetcar line, which this week achieved a new status. And going our way are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Mike Perlstein, investigative reporter, WWL-TV Channel 4. Jaquetta White, reporter, The New Orleans Advocate. And Stephanie Grace, columnist, The New Orleans Advocate. And first over to Stephanie, and we have a U.S. Senate race, and we're coming down the home stretch.
About a month away, and it's interesting. It's all over TV, obviously millions upon millions of dollars in ads, both from candidates and outside groups. In some ways, the storyline hasn't changed that much. It's really very much about Mary Landrieu, the incumbent, the Democratic incumbent in a Republican state, who survived all these years by being a moderate, being willing to cross party lines, and also really focusing on local issues, flood protection, loan forgiveness from Katrina, flood insurance, things like that. So she's running the same race she always has, really, saying, you know, it's good to have somebody who has leverage, it's good to have somebody who has seniority. She's the energy chair now, which is huge for the state. It's a really difficult environment for Democrats right now in the country and in states like this that are Republican. So her lead opponent, Bill Cassidy, who's a congressman, is really running as a Republican, as someone who's linking her to President Obama and unpopular national policies that she does vote on, even if those aren't her chosen issues. Right. So it's really, that's been the storyline all the way, and it still is really in a lot of ways. There is a complication, which is the third party, not a third party, but a third major contender named Rob Maness, who's a Tea Party guy. And because Louisiana has the open primary, they all run in November. Other states, the Tea Party versus mainstream Republican fight, you know, we've already been through that, but here we're having it at the same time as the partisan election. So that's really the wild card, and the theory is that Maness might attract enough attention to keep both of the other candidates below 50% and force a runoff in December.
I've often wondered if voters think the same way that the talking heads on national TV do. And the talking heads talk about theory and party ideology and all those divisions. But I wonder if voters think more about, what has this person done for me?
Well, that's the question. Mary Landrieu would like them to, I think. That's part of what we're seeing here. She is saying pretty directly, I have done this for you. I have gotten your loans forgiven in this parish and that parish. And it's really a referendum on that. And
so a talking head on CNBC isn't thinking about Katrina recovery, those sorts of issues.
And she also gets support from the energy industry. That would not be traditional, you know, for a Democrat.
Exactly.
But that's a pro-business vote.
Because one of the things that her campaign brings up is if she, no matter who's in the majority, if she's not in that top Democratic spot in the Energy Committee, the next person up is a senator named Maria Cantwell from Washington, who's really an environmentalist, so the policies would be very different.
Now, for Maness, he was really moving up a bit. Is he continuing to? Is that kind of leveled up?
He shows pretty well in the polls in the low teens. He will speak any place anybody invites him to. He's very charismatic. He had Sarah Palin in recently. They posed with alligators, you know, nice photo op. We don't know. One of the things that's happening now that's kind of interesting is the debate season started. And of course, Bill Cassidy has only agreed to 2 televised debates. Some of the others look like they're going to go ahead without him. We had a preview of that at the Alliance for Good Government Forum last week, which wasn't televised, but Landrieu and Maness showed up, and they spent a lot of time congratulating each other on having the guts to show up and bashing Bill Cassidy, who was not there.
What tends to happen often in a 3-person race where you have the third person's running significantly behind, but is that person will poll okay during the election because people are making a statement.
Right.
But on election day, they think, well, he's not going to win, and so they go another way.
Or are they thinking the Senate is up? I mean, because people here do care about national politics.
So there's a good chance that his vote, as it's polling now, would abandon him by the time you get to election day.
I mean, one of the other dynamics, I think, is it's a referendum on President Obama. So people don't get to vote against him, but they do get to vote against his designee or the person they would consider his designee. That, I think, happens too.
So how important is this race now to the balance of the Senate?
It is one of quite a number at this point that are very, very close. The Republicans would have to pick up 6 seats. They probably have 3 very easily at this point, and there are probably 6 or so other seats that are in place. Some of them incumbent Democrats like Landrieu in Alaska, North Carolina, some of them open seats. There are a few seats where Democrats are moving up and could possibly take from Republicans. There are a lot of moving parts, which makes the possibility of our runoff so interesting because that could be the one that decides. However, there's also a runoff possibility in Georgia, which is another of these tight seats, and that election would be in January, where ours is December. So,
okay, we're into it now.
Yeah.
These last weeks, so we'll be talking about this a lot more, I'm
Yes.
sure. Thanks a lot, Stephanie. Jaquetta, over to you for the World Trade Center. Once again, the city is saying, okay, let's get some more ideas and see if we can do something with this building. Tell us the latest.
They've issued a new call for a request for qualifications this time, not a request for proposal. So they want to get as many ideas on the table as they can. The city last did this in 2012, late 2012, and narrowed it down to 3 finalists, 2 of whom wanted to redevelop the building into a combination hotel and residential, and 1 that wanted to demolish it and put something else in its place. The team they selected, the deal fell through in April after the city and it was Gatehouse and DAG Development. They couldn't agree on what price the developers should pay for the property. So the city has changed some things this time around. When they do this call and narrow down the finalists, they won't negotiate with one developer. Instead, they'll negotiate with as many as they would like to, and sort of pit them against one another to bring their best deal to the table, in the hopes that they can drive up the price or get something closer to what they believe is fair market value for the building. And also, they've decided that no longer is demolition of the building an option. You have to redevelop it this time. And that was something that had been a shock to people last time. There was a huge public outcry when a group had proposed demolishing it and putting something that was yet undecided in its place. Exactly, an iconic structure in its place.
The Bureau of Governmental Research came out with a proposal saying, look, instead of the city being the leasing, why don't you just sell the building to the highest bidder? That way there'd be some tax advantages and competition advantages. Is that something people are taking seriously?
The city has said, Cedric Grant, who's the executive director of the New Orleans New Orleans Building Corp, has said that that's not an option. The city has considered it and decided that they won't go that route because it requires first for the city to list the World Trade Center as surplus. And once a property is listed as surplus property, they have to sell it at auction to the highest bidder. And so there's no guarantee, they believe, that it will be a fiscally responsible deal.
So right now, they've put out a request for qualifications as opposed to an RFP proposal. What's the difference there?
Sure, the request for qualifications is much more general. And after that, they'll narrow down that group and they'll be asked to give more specific details about their plans, specifically cost and how much you're giving the city. And those finalists will also make in-person presentations to the city.
And what's the timeline here? When do people have to have them in? And then is there another deadline set for when a selection would be made?
Yep, everything's due next month, late November.
Quick.
And a selection is expected in March.
Okay.
Are any of the bidders expected back from last time?
I've heard from one so far. Birch Development has said that it is not interested in another round.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot, Jaquetta.
Thank you.
Mike, over to you right now. False imprisonment. We're hearing of people who've spent time in prison many, many years, later to be exonerated. Perhaps they didn't commit the crime. That's the case of one individual who was in jail in the prison for 17 years, Mr. Brown, for
Correct,
a
Nathan
rape
Brown.
that ultimately was decided, no, he did not do this, and so he was in pretty short order set free from prison.
Well, short order after 17 years.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
What did happen in relatively short order in his case is that he was compensated, and the state does have a law and the ability through the Attorney General's office to compensate victims of wrongful convictions. In his case, it was pretty clear-cut because he was cleared by DNA evidence, which excluded him as the perpetrator and actually pointed to somebody else who was known to be in the vicinity and had a history of sexual assault. So in that one, there was no doubt. Now, interesting though, the Attorney General does not always acquiesce to these requests for compensation. And Louisiana has had more than 30 exonerations, just since they started sort of keeping tabs on this. An organization called the Innocence Project started in New York, and the Innocence Project of New Orleans, which actually covers the whole state of Louisiana plus Mississippi, is the second busiest Innocence Project in the country.
Really?
But they also gain exonerations of people through means other than DNA. And there's a whole list of reasons that can range from false confessions, prosecutorial misconduct, and witnesses who recant. Those cases are not always clear-cut. It's not, as if you have the scientific evidence of DNA to definitively prove somebody was innocent. You can certainly show that somebody, there was not enough evidence to convict a person, but to actually show their actual innocence, and that's the legal term of art, actual innocence, is required, at least under this Attorney General, to compensate. And the compensation, it's $25,000 per year of incarceration, up to 10 years. That's $250,000. They can also kick in another $80,000 for lost life opportunities, to make a maximum of $330,000. That's what Nathan Brown is getting. He's getting the max.
And in that case also, it was DA Paul Connick who decided that charges would be dropped. Is that what happened? And
yeah,
when I say short order, I certainly don't mean to,
Right, no, once the DNA evidence came back and it was conclusive that it was not Nathan Brown, Paul Connick's office actually joined in the motion to clear, to vacate the prior conviction and decide not to, make him stand trial again.
But I guess we can point out by the same way that DNA is freeing people wrongfully convicted, is DNA helping people from not being wrongfully convicted nowadays?
Well, a lot of these cases go back before DNA was being used. And so in this case of a 17-year-old case, and there have been many, many others, sometimes 3 decades or more, there was no DNA. It was simply eyewitness testimony, and now science has actually caught up on so many of these forensic issues, including witness identification. Cross-racial witness identification has proven to be quite poor. And what was so definitive 30 years ago, where a victim absolutely was certain who was the perpetrator, DNA, and it's fortunate in cases where there's enough evidence left behind to actually go to DNA now that we have that science available, and has led to many exonerations.
And so it's expected that we're going to be seeing more, and could it work both ways in having this forensic evidence?
There have been some cases in which people who've been convicted, file to have DNA tested, and have affirmed their conviction that was the right perpetrator all along. Now what will be, I think, even more interesting is the most recent case in Orleans was somebody named Reginald Adams. He had been convicted and spent more than 30 years on a robbery murder, and he was not freed by any DNA, but by simply just an avalanche of evidence, including police reports that were withheld by prosecutors that actually pointed to another perpetrators who were found with stolen belongings from the victim. And the district attorney in New Orleans, Leon Canizero, joined in the motion to vacate that conviction and free Reginald Adams. But there is no DNA. There's no, how do you prove a negative? How do you prove actual innocence? That's going to be a little tougher. It will be interesting to see how the Attorney General, takes a position on a case like that.
Has the state created a fund for this? I mean, where is the money going to come from?
It's allocated by the state. It's within state government. It's, really a fairly small amount, and it's not often used. I think there have been 36 requests and 21 granted, and it's not always the max of $330,000.
And it's up to the Attorney General. It's not it's not a courtroom proceeding to determine that?
No, it is actually, through the AG, through this, compensation fund that's been set aside. Most states now have this as this whole topic of wrongful convictions, with now, more than 300 nationwide on DNA alone, we realized that, hey, people who've done decades in prison for something they didn't do should be compensated.
Okay, Mike, thanks a lot. Very interesting. Errol, over to you. Our Streetcar got a very nice recognition.
A little bit more upbeat news. The Department of Interior recognized the Streetcar as a National Historic Landmark, and the people here like to claim that that the St. Charles line is the oldest continually running streetcar line in the country, 175 years. That's true with a slight asterisk on the top if you don't think about those few months after Katrina when it wasn't running, but still the line itself was in place. It just wasn't quite running, but there's nothing that's been there longer than the streetcar line is. But there are some things that are incredible about that line, and one is that the cars that you see when you go down St. Charles Canal, they go back to the 1920s. They were built by a company called the Perlstein Company out of High Point, North Carolina. Now, the Perlstein Company went out of business a long time ago, and so the maintenance and the reconstruction of them is all done on Willow Street in New Orleans. I mean, New Orleans is the epicenter for the care and the restoration of Perlstein of the vintage streetcars. All the ones you see probably go back to the 1920s or 30s. All of them were refurbished in the 1990s, but it still goes back to the original cars. And they're numbered in the 900 series, and so when you see one passing by, anytime I see a streetcar, I'm always looking for the number. The closer to 900 it is, the older the streetcar is, and there are 35 of them out there. I saw 907 yesterday, which was which has been the 7th oldest. But a couple of things that streetcar people have told me that I think are interesting. One is the incredible cooling and heating system that they have in those old streetcars. And what these people figured out in the 1920s is if it's too hot in the streetcar, you put the window up. And if it's too cold, you put the window down. And it works amazingly, okay? Because between the people and different levels and all that, and I can tell you on 12th night I rode in the streetcar, it was 27 degrees outside, and some people had the window up, some had it down, and it's perfectly. And so it always has a perfect temperature balance. And one time I was talking to a mechanic who worked there, and who kind of confided to me, as I recall to quote him, he says, "Streetcars ain't got no roaches," okay? And he claims, because he's been in there, he's been in the guts and the bowels of streetcars and all that, and he says it's because of the steel on steel that for some reason it sends these vibrations. Now, I can't verify for sure because I haven't looked for streetcars, but they are amazing, and they're simple machines, and they're totally different machines from the red machines. I mean, the red machines are modern transportation vehicles with a streetcar shell on them painted red. But we have gone down St. Charles Avenue and Canal. It really is something that deserves historic recognition.
There's nothing like the rumble of the streetcar line. I mean, nothing
can duplicate that. It's just so unique, and it's such a reassuring sound to hear.
It's
really
a
was after
roach-free
Katrina.
rumble. Where else?
It definitely is.
Where else can you get that?
Right.
How about those reversible seats? That was ingenious.
Oh, yeah, that was
The reversible seats too, classic.
Love the classic streetcar. Great designation for it. Jaquetta, zoning in New Orleans. This has been really something that so many people have been trying to accomplish, literally for decades. And now City Council is going to be voting soon on a comprehensive zoning ordinance.
Very close to finalizing the comprehensive zoning ordinance, and this has been decades in the making. The document that governs zoning right now is 40 years old, and they've been writing this comprehensive zoning ordinance for about 4 years now. It'll give force of law to the master plan, and this will govern everything from where we build to what we build to how tall we can build it. And there have been several battles that have come out, most notably the Riverfront Overlay District that's proposed in this new zoning ordinance has been a point of contention in the Bywater neighborhood, where half the neighborhood says we definitely want to build residential buildings up to 75 feet tall on the riverfront, and another group says no, we want it to be 50 feet, much shorter.
Well, that's really nothing new. I mean, there's always been people who have been in opposite sides of a plan. So what will this zoning ordinance do? And we have a master plan.
Right.
Does it give the master plan, or will it, when it is passed, give the master plan a force of law?
That's exactly right. It gives the master plan force of law. All the ideas in the master plan, it fleshes them out more. And so the master plan said, we want this area to be residential. We think this area should be industrial. This marks off block by block what should happen, and says, where you should focus interests, where people should live, how they should live.
Jaquetta, you did a column a few weeks ago where you talked about two council members, Nadine Ramsey and Stacey Head, and you compared the different philosophies they had about preservation and zoning issues.
That's right. It'll be interesting going forward. There's a philosophical difference between the way they see property and property rights, particularly when it comes to demolition. Stacey Head is a self-avowed preservationist. She believes that people who live in properties are the stewards of those properties, and they, especially historic properties we're talking about here, and they should preserve them for generations to come. Nadine Ramsey, particularly in the case of people who can't afford to maintain homes, thinks it should be the choice of the property owner to decide what they want to do with the property. And if they want to demolish it, that should be their right if they can't afford to keep it up.
Now the comprehensive zoning ordinance also, I mean, it's not going to be totally rigid. It's going to have some pliability too, right?
That's right. And there's actually an entire article, Article 5, that says you can negotiate this stuff.
Which means that the city council will still get involved in these hot button issues.
Exactly. Yes.
There are always variances.
Exactly. So the variances won't stop.
But
The spot zoning may not stop.
Well, that's the whole idea, though, is to try to avoid what has been called Thursday morning zoning, which, of course, is the day of council meeting. Thanks a lot, Jaquetta. All right, Stephanie, we've got some other races on the ballot, too. So let's take a quick look at those and go through those. Let's start right now with the Public Service Commission. We're up first.
3 candidates. Eric Skrmeta is the incumbent. This one's pretty heated. His opponents are accusing him of really being in the pocket of the industries he regulates, taking a lot of political contributions from them and doing their bidding. Forrest Wright, one of his challengers, said the other day, not just that he was in their pocket, but he's practically an employee. Eric Skrmeta shot back and said, well, you're in the pocket of big solar. So it's a little heated. Al Leone is the 3rd candidate, who is basically saying, I'm not in anybody's pocket.
So how's this race looking? Any polling or anything?
Not that I know of. Okay. Skrmeta has the name identification, so it'll be tough.
In the incumbent.
Yes.
All right, on to Civil District Court in Orleans, and that's Division D.
Yes, Lloyd Medley is the incumbent, longtime incumbent. He's getting a very spirited challenge from Nikisha Irvin Knott. Lloyd Medley's had some health issues, although he says he's doing fine. He's had some controversy over how he manages his docket. And she's really pounding him on that, and also some issues in his courtroom. She has brought up how he treats women in the, female lawyers. She's got a lot of support, so that's going to be an interesting one.
She's tried for other races too, hasn't she?
Medley's been off the bench quite a bit.
He has, with these health problems, although again, I've seen him at forums stand up and say, I'm fine. So he's lost a lot of weight.
She has sought another
She's
position
run in the
she had
past,
before?
yes.
Okay. All righty, still Civil District Court, Division F.
Yes, Chris Bruno and Ruth Ramsey. These are 2 big New Orleans names, actually. This is interesting. Chris Bruno is the incumbent. Bruno obviously is a legendary name in legal circles in New Orleans. Ruth Ramsey is actually the sister of Nadine Ramsey, the council member who recently elected by quite a large margin, so has a real good political machine behind her that is now with Ruth Ramsey. Of course, Nadine Ramsey had been a judge also.
And Chris Bruno is the incumbent there.
He's the
seated
incumbent,
judge. Okay.
correct.
On to still Civil District Court. This is Domestic. Section 1.
A couple years ago, New Orleans, basically the state created 2 permanent domestic sections. In the past, the junior members of the civil bench have served and then kind of rotated out. So the decision was made to really make it a specialty. Bernadette D'Souza was the first one elected. It is her specialty. She was elected without opposition. Now she has a challenge for re-election from someone who basically says that she doesn't give fathers a fair shake. So that's kind of an interesting one.
Okay, on to Section 2, Domestic Section, and for regular and unexpired term.
Right. This is the vacancy. It's a new domestic section. It's the vacancy created by the resignation of Judge Michael Bagneris, who had been the chief judge, long time on the bench, resigned to run for mayor against Mitch Landrieu, and of course lost.
All right, let's move on now to Criminal District Court, Section D.
This is a wild one. Yes, Frank Marullo. You talked last week about there were some recordings. Marie Williams. Frank Marullo is the incumbent. One of the challengers, Marie Williams, recorded him seemingly offering her support for a job if she dropped out. maybe not explicitly. So that's floating around. And
Well,
there's
he
another,
denies that. We've got
and he of course denies that. And the other interesting issue is his age.
He's 74 now.
Right.
He turned 75 on, I think it's December 31st.
The mandatory retirement age is 70.
Correct.
However,
Now, he is actually older than that law with the retirement age. So, but he's in that position where on November 4th, there's also a statewide constitutional amendment that would
To lift
lift
that.
the age
Right.
limits for judges.
Okay.
So
and he would be free and clear.
in the interim, what the courts have said is that he can run, but it's not clear he can serve.
Okay, we have to move on. Section G, Criminal
Section
District Court.
G. This is an open seat created by the retirement of Judge Julian Parker. Paul Sens is a longtime municipal court judge, a big family, well-known, has had some controversy.
A big family, many of them working
Exactly, yes,
in
on the
municipal court
payroll,
where he
yes.
was.
And I've got to push you along here to juvenile court, so we
This
can
is,
mention that one too.
It's so crowded because Yolanda King, the incumbent, is under indictment for lying about her residency.
And
This is-
suspended from the bench.
And suspended from the bench, but still running, and she will stand up at forums and say that she's a reformer.
And several people running against
Yes.
her. We can see there.
And
Okay.
of course, this is the seat Mitch Landrieu tried to eliminate and was unsuccessful in doing that.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Stephanie.
Sure.
Good rundown. All right,
Okay.
looking ahead, everybody. Errol.
First of all, congratulate Stephanie for getting through that. Okay. Also on the ballot, some home rule charter amendments. One that will advance the day that mayors are sworn in from May to January. That makes it a little bit better for budgeting, but it's part of an earlier amendment that will advance the election day so that you're not having election days between Mardi Gras and on the day before the Super Bowl like happened a few years ago. And so the whole terms of governments, I assume the path is about to shift so that mayors will come in January.
Mike.
Well, getting off politics for just a second, on sports, we know that the Saints are having their troubles. We just heard about the injury to Jerry Spurr, their highest priced free agent. But if the Saints don't pan out this season, the very first preseason game for the Pelicans is Saturday.
Okay,
tomorrow.
very good. Looking forward to that. Jaquetta.
I'll stick with zoning since the council will vote sometime soon, possibly this month. If you want another shot at talking with your council person, check the council calendar because they'll be holding district meetings throughout the week next week.
Thanks a lot. Stephanie?
And back to politics, in case all of this isn't enough for you, we have a governor's race that's for next year that's already started, and we got a kind of major new candidate this week named Scott Angel, who is a public service commissioner. Former Democrat ally of Kathleen Blanco became a Republican ally of Bobby Jindal. So an interesting guy, Cajun, big personality, shakes things up.
Never a shortage of political stories,
Yes.
Stephanie. That's good. Thanks a lot, you guys, for being here. And thank you all for joining us so much. And of course, we want to see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.